My son and his wife left me at gate 32 like garbage with $50 and a suitcase that's seen more miles than my son ever earned. I'm Harold Quinn, 67, retired Air Force engineer. Jason and his wife Vanessa thought they'd already won. They forged my signature, called me confused, and told neighbors I was losing it. They even filmed my shaking hands, hoping one tremor could sign away my life. But here's the thing about men who spent decades building flight systems for wars they never saw. We don't panic when turbulence hits. We plan. For months, I let them believe the lie they were writing for me. Let them transfer my mail, control my accounts, and whisper to everyone that I was ready for a nursing home. What they didn't know was that the red light inside my old Air Force cap wasn't just decoration. It was recording every word, every threat, every forged document. They thought they'd buried me under incompetence. I was building a case under silence, because sometimes the best way to fight back isn't through anger, it's through evidence and patience. By the time the sun rose over gate 32, I wasn't the one abandoned. I was the one documenting their downfall. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and comment where you're watching from. The loudspeaker cracked with an apology for the delay to Denver. The voice was clean and indifferent. It skimmed over the rows of blue vinyl seats like wind over a pond. People shifted, wheels rolled. A little boy in a shark hoodie tugged his mother toward a candy stand. The light was the kind you find in hospitals and laboratories. Flat, white. It made every scuff in the tile honest. I set the suitcase upright with both hands and felt the old leather bite back. That handle had been in my palm on 100 mornings when work meant metal and fuel and problem solving. Now it held a simpler job. Look old. Look slowly. Looks like a man who would sign anything to make the noise stop. Jason's last look toward me had the shape of mercy rehearsed in a mirror. He pretended not to see me watching him. Vanessa held her phone at chest level and pretended she was not filming. The lens caught the tremor they wanted. It did not catch my thumb flicking the recorder sewn beneath the cap's lining. Tiny diode. Steady glow. The cap smelled faintly of motor oil that no shower can scrub out. It smelled like a life I built with steadiness no one could see from 30 feet away. The boarding pass in my shirt pocket pressed a rectangle against my heart. Savannah to Miami one way. Jason bought it with my card to add shape to the story. An old man wandering toward the sun and losing himself by the water. Freedom on paper. A neat exit. The kind of narrative spreadsheets love. I ran my finger along the edge and thought about paper as a weapon. Nothing cuts cleaner. They gave me $50 for the road and expected gratitude to be the receipt. I folded the bills once, then once again, and tucked them behind the pass. I would keep their generosity like I kept their lies. Cataloged, dated, useful. The bar near the gate pushed out the smell of coffee and burnt sugar. I stood, carried the bag 2 steps, and set it by a circular table spotted with rings. A young man in a polo asked if I needed help. He had the easy concern of people who have not yet learned how the worst wounds are invisible. I told him I was fine. I told him I was waiting for my family. He nodded like he wanted to believe it and walked on. I did not watch him go. I watched the clock. When you have lived around engines, time stops being a theory. It becomes torque values and service windows, and the way a hand quivers when a bolt is about to strip. There is a rhythm to patience. I listened to the rhythm now. I took the coffee they handed me and set it near the edge. My palm brushed the paper cup and it tilted. Dark liquid breathed out across the tabletop and fell in a thin curtain to the tile. It ran in lines that reminded me of creek beds drawn by a careful boy with a dull pencil. The stain widened. People made space for it. I said sorry in a voice that belonged to a man who did not want trouble. A custodial woman arrived with a towel and a small, tired smile. Loss had a smell. Wet coffee. Hot and bitter. I let it sink in. It was the last thing I would spill that I did not choose. Across the glass that looked out to the tarmac, the city sat soft and low. A jet crawled toward a gate like a beetle returning to a bright flower. My reflection floated over that motion like a ghost that had not yet decided which way to walk. I studied the man in the glass. Gray stubble, clean shirt, cap pulled low, steady shoulders. I let my hand rest on the suitcase and slowed my breathing the way a medic taught me a lifetime ago. Calm is a tool. So is silence. The loudspeaker called a final boarding for a city I was not visiting. The words clicked me back to a kitchen table 8 months earlier. Jason sat there with a printed article about memory loss and the gentle tone that feels like a glove over a fist. He said the bills were confusing. He said he could help. He said it would be temporary. He slid a paper toward me with small boxes highlighted in yellow and told me it was routine. Vanessa stood behind him, bright and effortless, holding a glass of water with a careless bend in her wrist. They were good at making care look like love. I was good at reading manuals. Small boxes can hide large doors. The announcer mispronounced a name. Applause rose from nowhere and fell back into the white air. I blinked the kitchen away and came back to the gate. A family sat near me. The grandmother wore a sweater the color of a robin's egg and patted her grandson's knee whenever he kicked the seat. He kicked anyway. He looked at me just long enough to decide I was safe. Children are conservative with their trust. They know things. I tipped my cap and he mimicked me. His grandmother smiled and then looked down, embarrassed by her kindness. That small moment did not belong to Jason's story. I put it in mine. The recorder warmed the cap with a breath of heat. I traced the path of its wire down the crown seam and felt for the micro switch. On. I adjusted the brim and caught Vanessa's last glance over her shoulder before she disappeared toward the moving walkway. She wanted one more tremor. I gave her stillness. I gave her the back of a hand that could hold a wrench steady on a vibrating wing. They had no idea what steadiness looks like when it is quiet. I turned the boarding pass over. On the back, someone had stamped a time. Printed at 11, purchased at 10:32. Some people never learn that clocks tell on you. I slid the pass back into my pocket and took out a folded card with a downtown address. The safe sat behind a second door in a law office that smelled like old books and lemon oil. The key was in my other pocket, attached to a small tag that said Whitaker Lock and Safe, with a phone number handwritten by a man named Paul, who did not ask questions when I paid in cash. The deed had slept there for months between a will and a copy of a medical evaluation with my name spelled correctly in 3 places. I do not like sleeping documents, but sometimes you let a thing lie where no one thinks to look. A woman in a blazer asked if the seat beside me was taken. I told her no and moved my suitcase an inch. She sat with the crisp attention of a person who keeps a list and chews her pen caps. She glanced at my hands and then looked away. People do that when they want to know if you are trembling. There is a new kind of theater in this country. Everyone has a camera. Everyone is half performing and half consuming the performances of others. I drank what remained of the coffee, warm and bitter, and let my eyes rest on the line of doors that yawned and closed as flights bled passengers into the building. I took out a small notebook with a black cover. It fit in my palm and looked like nothing. I wrote the time Jason called me, confused. I wrote the time Vanessa lifted her phone and the angle she favored when she wanted my hands to look worse. I wrote the exact words a bystander whispered to his partner when they walked past. Poor man. The partner said, "Not our business." I added their sentence to the record without judgment. A record is not a courtroom. It is a clean table where truth can be placed and measured later. My phone buzzed in my pocket. One message, on schedule, no punctuation, no name. I put the phone away without replying. The less a phone says, the better it ages. I reached down to tie my shoe and let the recorder catch the sound of my breath, the distant gate agent calling group numbers, the scrape of my suitcase feet. Texture matters. When people hear a sound without seeing it, they believe the sound more than they believe a camera. Cameras lie for sport. Air does not know how. I glanced once in the direction Jason and Vanessa had gone and then let them vanish from my mind. The plan did not require me to chase anyone. It required me to sit still and give their version of the story enough rope to wrap itself. A nurse wheeled an elderly man toward the restroom. He stared at the ceiling tiles with a look I recognized from a hospital year that began with hope and ended with the precise clink of a wedding ring placed in a dish. I put that sound away. I would not live in it. I would only visit when the air was too clean. The custodial woman returned with a yellow cone and set it by the table. Wet floor. She smiled at me in a way that made an apology unnecessary. I thanked her for rescuing my coffee from poor balance. She said accidents happen and pushed her cart forward. I watched the cone catch the overhead light and glow like a small warning in the middle of a small life. We ignore cones until we fall. A gate agent tapped her microphone and told us not to leave our luggage unattended. The sentence was for everyone and for no one. I nodded as if I had been singled out. I looked down at the suitcase and the biggest scuff, the one shaped like a crescent moon across the corner where Helen once taped a ribbon so I could find it faster on a carousel. The ribbon was long gone. Glue ghosts remained. The past leaves fingerprints even after you clean the glass. I stood once more to stretch and let my knees say their age. A man with a baseball cap that read Army in yellow letters walked by. We nodded to each other in the language that moves between men who have carried orders. His eyes were kind. He did not slow. We did not need to talk. We never do. Respect can be done in 3 seconds and means more than a speech. The loudspeaker announced early boarding for a flight to Chicago. Wheels rolled again. Conversations rose and fell. I sat back and let my pulse find a slower number. Every plan I have ever trusted has rested on one skill. Do nothing at the exact right time. That is the part that makes people nervous. Everyone wants to act. No one wants to wait. Waiting is where truth gets impatient and shows itself. I watched patience work. I watched it like a mechanic watching a pressure gauge climb into a band painted yellow by a careful hand. Somewhere across town, a metal door sat behind a heavy desk, and behind that desk, a man in a gray suit with a veteran pin on his lapel would be setting 2 folders side by side. One was red and held the deed that would outlive me. One was blue and held a letter on official paper that said the thing Jason most feared hearing. There was nothing theatrical about those papers. They were quiet and final and had no interest in applause. The boarding pass pressed against my chest again when I breathed. I slid it out and looked at the destination one more time. It was a fantasy. It was a story written for optics. I put it back. I would not fly anywhere today. I had already arrived where I needed to be. The terminal hummed, and the white light made everything honest. I lifted my cap just enough to feel the tiny warmth of the recorder and then settled it again. The diode held steady. The evidence built itself in layers as gentle as dust and as permanent as dust, once it settles in the right place. A bell chimed from somewhere near the gate. The sound was clear and oddly human. I closed my notebook and slid it into the side pocket of the suitcase. My hand rested on the old leather, and I waited for nothing in particular. There was a time in my life when I thought strength was a louder word. Today, it felt like air moving in and out of my chest without hurry. I was not going anywhere. I had done the only traveling that mattered. I had walked from fear to attention. I had taken a seat. I had let them leave. And because I listened to the silence finally spoke back. After Helen died, silence became the language of our house. It spoke from the porch first. The wicker chair she loved carried a small groove where her elbow used to rest when the evening cooled the brick. Magnolia leaves rattled like soft paper in a drawer no one opened anymore. The porch light clicked on by habit at 7 and washed the steps in the kind of yellow that makes dust honest. That first month, I learned how a cup cools untouched. I learned that the boards give a little near the 3rd step. I learned that grief weighs a person sitting beside you without sound. Jason came by with groceries that did not taste like us, almond milk instead of the carton she used to shake and laugh about. He stood on the porch and glanced toward the chair and chose the rail instead. He told me bills were coming due, and there were a lot of them after a funeral. He told me we should make things easier for a while by letting auto pay carry the weight. He said the bank has tools, and I said paper is safer because paper keeps a memory that cannot be edited. He smiled like someone humoring an elder and put the bags on the kitchen counter one by one. Vanessa stayed in the car and checked her phone, her fingers moving lightly as if words weighed nothing in her hands. I tried to keep the house breathing. I watered Helen's African violets every other afternoon and left the radio on low with the station we used to argue about. She liked songs where the words did not repeat. I like songs built like engines that run forever if you change the oil. The mail slid through the brass slot with a small slap around noon each day. The first time a stack arrived without a property tax bill, I told myself it was late. The second time, I told myself patience is a tool. The third time, I put the stack on the porch table and sorted it on the wood beside the ring left by her teacup. Power, gas, lawn service, condolence cards that came late because people do not keep stamps anymore. No tax bill. I called Jason and told him about the missing envelope. He told me the county was pushing online notices now and it was easier for him to handle it at his office because their printer was fast and there was a scanner and he could keep a clean record. He said he would swing by to update a few addresses to take the pressure off. He said pressure lightly, like a doctor touching a bruise to show it was not broken. I said I could manage, and he said, "Do not carry things you do not have to." He came by after work in a shirt that smelled like a dealership. The porch light caught the gleam on his collar in a way that made me think of tools polished for display. He laid a stack of forms on the kitchen table and said it was routine. He slid a pen toward me and pointed where to write. I asked if Helen would have liked these changes, and he did not answer for a breath. He said she would have wanted me to rest. The porch held that conversation after he left. Bored still, air heavy with the lemon oil I rubbed into the railing the day before, because she taught me to care for things that last longer than people. I sat in her chair without asking permission from a woman who was not there to give it, and the chair did not complain. Across the street, Mrs. Wheeler watered her roses and pretended not to look. She asked whether casseroles freeze well, and I said I think they do. I asked if she had seen the county man lately, and she said not this week. She told me she liked the way Helen waved from this porch, and I said I did too, and then we both stood quiet and looked in the same direction because that is how neighbors pray. Vanessa started coming in with Jason after that, as if the porch had remembered her name. She perched on the edge of the steps with her phone near her knee and asked if I wanted to try an app that keeps medicine times in a gentle tone. She said it would help me and help them help me. She said the app had a soothing color palette, and I said color can lie. Jason told her to set it up anyway, and I let them because resistance takes energy, and I was saving mine. She made a small video of my pill organizer resting on the kitchen counter and added a song under it because silence makes the internet nervous. Then she smiled at me as if her doing that was love, and I told her I appreciated the effort. I did not say for what. The porch learned our new routine. Jason sat with his laptop open and said he would go ahead and enroll my utilities online so I would not have to think about writing checks. He said checks get lost. He said the paper is a mess. He said he could be the spreadsheet and I could be the memory. I told him memory needs paper to keep it honest. He laughed and asked if I wanted him to rake the magnolia leaves before they stained the walk. I told him I would do it at dusk when the heat moved like a sleeper turning in bed. He nodded and changed the subject to insurance. When he left, the porch traded the smell of his cologne for cut grass and the sweet sour of dropped magnolia cones. The chair beside me warmed from my shoulder and cooled again. A week later, a neighbor I did not know well dropped a letter that belonged to me into my hand at the fence. The postman had put it in her box by mistake. She said she thought it might be important because of the seal. City of Savannah Water Services. The envelope was addressed to Jason at his office. A notice inside asked him to confirm a change to the mailing address on my account. It included my account number and a date that matched the afternoon he sat on my porch with his laptop. It thanked Jason for keeping his loved one's life simple. The letter used a tone cities use when they want to be your friend without meeting you. I thanked the neighbor and folded the paper twice and slid it into the pocket of my flannel, even though the day was too warm for flannel. The porch looked the same, but it had shifted under my feet just enough for me to feel it. I expected the county to send a similar note. Nothing came. I checked my mailbox with the care of someone examining a panel joint one finger width at a time. Jason continued to say the county uses email now. He tapped his screen and said, "See?" He tipped it toward me, and the glare off the glass showed more porch than proof. He smiled the way men smile when they are sure of a win, and I put a hand on the railing to keep my balance and learned that wood can steady you even when it was cut before your son was born. That night, after the porch cooled and the frogs rehearsed the same 3 notes they had been practicing since June, I sat at the table and made a list in a small book with a black cover. Water moved, power moved, gas moved, tax unknown. Credit cards changed to paperless with an email I did not write. I dated the list. Then I put the book in the drawer with Helen's spare tea bag and an old letter opener with a brass airplane at the hilt that turned slightly in my hand like it remembered my grip. Vanessa began asking for short clips in better light. She said it was helpful to document progress. She said caregivers online find comfort in shared stories. She said I was brave for letting her capture our journey. Each word had a ribbon on it that fluttered in the algorithm. I told her bravery is what you do when no one can thank you. She looked at Jason to translate, and he told me Vanessa is trying. I said I knew she was. The porch held that too. It held the way their voices would drop when they said the word facility. It held the way they circled the idea of guardianship like birds who want the bread without coming too close to the hand. It held the sound my pencil made when I drew a small square beside the word deed and left it empty, not from fear, but because precious things do not like to be hurried. On Sunday, during church, Dean Harper slid into the pew beside me with the weight of a man whose joints had opinions. After the service, he walked me to the curb and looked toward my porch, and then looked at my face. He asked a simple question anyone might ask a friend. "Are you sleeping?" I told him I heard the night. He said that night is a poor advisor. He said, "Come by his office one afternoon and bring any papers that make your chest stomp." He said he would not bill me for breathing the same air. He had a veteran pin on his jacket that caught the sun and threw one small coin of light on the sidewalk. I stepped on the light and felt something unclench. That evening I sat on Helen's chair and let the porch teach me a new grammar. A chair is a period. A breeze is a comma. The magnolia leaves make ellipses that say wait. Across the way, the wheeler boy pedaled his bike in circles so perfect the air wanted to clap. A dog barked twice to say I am here. The sky took off its heat and passed it to the ground. I remembered the first time Helen and I sat here with nothing to say and called that comfort. I understood why people mistake quiet for surrender. A shadow moved on the sidewalk and then lifted, and then moved again. Vanessa had found the angle where the porch light made prints. My phone vibrated with a calendar reminder I had not created. Appointment on Thursday for care consultation. Jason had typed those words with the care of a man setting a bolt into threads that do not belong to him. I thought about the first change of address card I filled out as a young husband. I thought about how a new key clinks in an old lock the first time and then falls silent because it is learned. I thought about the difference between help and a hand pushing slowly on your back. Then I reached under the chair cushion and slid out the small recorder I had taped there that afternoon to test whether the porch hears what I hear. Its diode held steady. The file list was clean. I placed it in my pocket and let the porch say its last line for the day. It said, "Listen." It said, "Do not answer the first version of any story." It said, "If paper is a weapon, then so is patience." When the appointment reminder blinked again, I turned the screen down on the table and watched the light from it widen and go thin and go out. They made me question my own memory, then filmed it for proof. That was the trick. Make the lie polite. Make the camera look like care. Jason practiced it in everyday places where kindness floats in the air and sticks to the first person who claims it. The grocery store, the pharmacy, church steps after the sermon when hands are full of bulletins and no one wants to believe a son would sharpen a story on his father. We were in the dairy aisle when he tried it first. He held up a carton and said we already bought milk yesterday. His voice had that soft edge that sounds like concern if you are not paying attention. I looked at the cart. Bread, eggs, coffee, no milk. I said I think this is our first milk of the week. He smiled at the man behind us and said he gets days mixed up sometimes. The man nodded and stepped around us as if my confusion might rub off. I watched Jason place the milk in the cart and take out his phone. He did not point it at my face. He angled it toward my hands. Camera can make a tremor out of a breath if you want it to. I reached for the coffee and let my fingers be the age they were. The shelf label hummed under the store lights with a number that did not matter. I remembered Helen reading labels as if they were poems. I picked the brand she always chose. Jason said, "Good job." Dad and I put the bag in the cart and kept walking. At the pharmacy, he stepped closer when I opened my pill organizer to check I had the right day. He told the clerk I had been forgetting lately and wanted to confirm my refills. The clerk had the professional smile of someone trained to accept every version of a family as true. She asked me my birth date, and I told her. She asked me to confirm my address, and I told her. She looked at her screen, And then she looked at Jason. He said the accounts are moving to my office for convenience. He said he is just helping. I let the words pass by like a breeze that does not cool a thing. He filmed the pillbox on the counter with a shot that made it look like a prop. On Sunday, after church, Jason guided me by the elbow down the steps in a way that tells a crowd you are saving a man from gravity. My body did not need saving. My reputation did. Vanessa stood at the bottom of the stairs with the phone in her palm and the camera already open. She spoke in a tone designed for an invisible audience. Caring daughter-in-law helps with balance as dad transitions. That was her caption later. The pastor shook my hand and looked at Jason with the gratitude reserved for people who do good deeds on camera. Jason thanked him. I nodded to a deacon I had known since the county still used paper ledgers for everything. He lifted his chin once. He had the eyes of a man who pays attention for a living. I filed that away. That afternoon, the neighbors brought over a pie and stood on the porch as if the porch were a stage. Vanessa waved them into a frame and asked if I had taken my medication on time. I said I had. Jason whispered that I had not. It was a small whisper with the weight of a brick. I held my breath until I could not hear my pulse in my ears. I said I had set the timers like she suggested. The neighbors nodded. They said it is good to see a family working together. The word together hung in the air like a painting that does not match the room. The twist landed on a Tuesday night when the street smelled like rain that never arrived. A message came from a number I did not recognize. The text had no greeting. It had a link and 4 words. Thought you should see. I set the phone on the porch table and watched the link glow in the decreasing light. Then I tapped it. The video opened with Vanessa's voice and Jason's easy laugh. Gentle reminder for caregivers when dad forgets where the milk goes again. My kitchen appeared under a warm filter. A hand opened the fridge and placed milk on the wrong shelf with the deliberate clumsiness of someone pretending to hurry. The clip cut to my pill organizer, and a close shot of my hand shaking. The caption said, "Sometimes it is hard to watch a decline. It is harder to pretend it is not happening." Hearts bloomed under the clip. The comments came like rain. "You are saints. This is love in action. Someday, we will all be in your shoes." I set the phone down. I looked at the porch boards. They did not move. They have never moved. People move the truth around a lot. Wood is honest. I watched the little bar show me that 3,000 strangers had seen my kitchen and felt relieved that my son was so noble. I scrolled once more and found a pause symbol. I pressed it and let the image freeze on my hand. Then I looked at the small clock in the corner of the video and did the math without needing paper. That was the morning I stacked envelopes on the porch because the mail never came. That was the morning Jason said he would handle the county notices because he had a scanner at work. That was the morning Vanessa filmed my pillbox while her calendar app was adding a care consult to my phone on its own. The milk in that clip was Jason's hand. I could see the half-moon scar on his thumb. He got it in high school on my bench grinder because he never learned to listen to how a wheel spins down. I went inside and stood by the kitchen sink. The house made the sound a house makes when it has memories, but no yelling. The fridge hummed. The clock ticked. The sink clicked as metal cooled. I took a deep breath and said a sentence out loud to a woman not present. "They are staging me." The words did not feel like anger. They felt like geometry. The shortest line between 2 points. I washed my hands because grease from old work finds you even on days you do not touch a tool. Then I wiped the counter the way Helen did. Long strokes. Corners matter. I put the dish towel back on the oven handle and straightened it until the edges met. That evening, Jason stopped by to collect signatures for what he called temporary guardianship papers meant to help with banking and insurance while you rest. He used the soft tone. Vanessa stood near the window where the light was even and positioned her phone as if she were cleaning a smudge from the glass. He placed the papers on the table and slid the pen toward me. "It will make things easier, Dad. It is just paperwork." I rested my hand on the table and felt the grain. Paperwork builds or breaks families' sons. The sentence sat between us like a tool set neither of us wanted to admit we understood. He laughed a short laugh that said I was being dramatic. He pointed to the boxes highlighted in gentle yellow. He explained each section as if he were reading me a bedtime story. Limited scope, temporary access, health convenience, He said we can always undo it later. I looked at the spaces where a name goes and saw my name already typed. I looked at the witness line and saw a blank next to Vanessa's neat printing of her own name on another copy peeking out from under the stack. I looked at the notary block with a seal faint enough to suggest authority without demanding scrutiny. I looked at Jason and said, "We will do this on Thursday." He blinked twice and asked what changes by Thursday. I said I sleep better after Wednesday. He smiled the way people smile when the fish bites and does not feel the hook yet. He gathered the pages and said, "Thursday afternoon then." He told Vanessa to set a reminder. She had already set it. After they left, I turned off the porch light and let the night show me its edges. I sat on the wicker chair and placed my palms on my knees and listened until the cicadas made a net strong enough to catch my thoughts. The text with the link still sat on my phone like a small lit doorway. I typed a reply. "Thank you. No name, no question." Then I scrolled the clip again without the sound and watched how a story is built frame by frame, with the camera exactly where a person who does not know tools would stand. In the reflection of the microwave door, I caught the corner of Vanessa's phone case. I zoomed until the lens was a small, dark eye. I did not feel fear. Fear belongs to surprises. This was not a surprise. This was evidence being kind enough to label itself. The wind moved across the porch and lifted one leaf so that it turned over and showed the pale underside. That was the sound I needed to begin. I went to the hall closet and took down a hat I had not worn in months. I turned it over in my hands the way you check a part you want to reuse. The lining was clean. The crown seam was tight. The brim felt like it would hold whatever weight I asked it to. I set the hat on the table and pressed the fabric with my thumb until it softened. On Thursday, I would be the man they expected to meet. Until then, I would listen. I placed my small black notebook beside the hat and wrote 3 lines. Milk video posted Tuesday at 19:15. A scar on Jason's thumb. Temporary guardianship papers proposed for Thursday. I closed the book and slid it under the hat. The house exhaled. Somewhere beyond the porch, a dog barked once and stopped. I breathed with the house until my chest slowed to the rhythm of boards that have held weight for decades without complaint. Then I whispered to the dark the one sentence they would not hear until it was too late. I am not confused. I am collecting proof. They made me question my own memory, then filmed it for proof. Late afternoon light lay itself thin across the living room, the kind of light that makes dust confess. The timer on Vanessa's app chimed from my phone in a cheerful tone that did not belong to this house. She was already near the counter with her camera open, her smile dressed for strangers. "You just mixed up the pills again, right?" I set the organizer down and looked at her the way you look at a bolt that has been cross-threaded. Or maybe I mixed up the people I trusted. She laughed softly, the way people laugh when they are certain the room agrees with them, and framed my hand like it was a symptom. Jason wandered in with the concerned pace of a man on stage. He said the word routine twice, as if repetition could turn it honest. He whispered that he had started a family group chat so everyone could track medication. He spoke as if everyone meant us. The use I heard did not include me. He held up his phone so I could see a neat timeline of reminders, a string of green dots, a single red one from last week saved like a trophy. He said this helps and angled the screen for Vanessa to catch both the dots and my face. I answered the only person in the room who still believes me. Silence. It listened. At the bank the next morning, the carpet tried to be quiet about all the feet it carried. A young clerk with a tie the color of new pennies asked how he could help. I said I wanted paper statements again. He typed, paused, looked at the screen and said, "Your son called last week to add himself as a convenience contact. He said the form was pending. He said these changes are common after a loss. He said he was sorry for mine." He kept his voice soft, the way people do when they cannot fix a thing but want to hold it politely. My phone rang in my pocket and shook the conversation loose. I let it ring twice and then answered. Jason asked, "Where are you?" I told him the truth. He said, "Do you need me to come get you?" I said I am standing at a counter making a choice. He said it would be easier if he handled it. He said paperwork is heavy. I told him paper is lighter than regret and ended the call. The clerk coughed into his fist and found a key on a chain to print a form. I signed a box that took my accounts back from the cloud to the mailbox that carries breath. The machine hummed and fed me paper with a sound that landed like relief. On Thursday morning, the phone chimed again with a reminder I did not set. Care consult in 2 hours. Vanessa placed a glass of water by my elbow and arranged the pill organizer for another video that looked like help. She held her smile steady until the camera found focus and then turned it down 1 notch for sincerity. The doctor's office called early to confirm. Vanessa put the call on speaker. Her voice softened at the edges as she spoke for me. We have been seeing more forgetfulness. We have been monitoring agitation. We have noticed him misplacing medications. I waited for my turn to answer a question that had already been answered. When the nurse asked me my date of birth, I told her. When she asked about the color of the bottle cap, I told her. When she asked how often I felt confused, I said rarely. Vanessa said he does not always know when he is confused. The line went quiet the way lines do when a note is being written. A pen whispered on paper in a room I could not see. I let the pen write. Pens show their loyalties later. By noon, the house had the hush it wears before a storm that only exists in one room. I walked to the porch to listen to wood remember its job. The magnolia held, the air under its leaves the way a hand cups water without spilling. I took out the phone that keeps trying to be the center of this story. It is a stage light. It makes the person in front of it the only truth in the room. The screen glowed with a video Vanessa posted that morning. Caregiver tip: keep meds visible. She had chosen a filter that warmed the kitchen and cooled me. Comments drifted in like mist. You are angels. Bless you for your patience. Decline is so hard. I watched the little hearts tumble and fall down the screen like coins into a well where no one plans to draw water. The doorbell rang with a sound that reminded me of the 90s. Mrs. Wheeler stood on the steps with her granddaughter, a teenager whose hair made the sunlight want to show off. She held her phone with the confidence of someone who has lived her whole life in the shallow end of a bright pool. She said, "Mr. Quinn, I wanted to check on you." Then she looked at her granddaughter, who was already tilting a screen toward me. It was not Vanessa's page. It was a larger account that gathers other people's moments and sells them as comfort. There I was, standing by my fridge, set to a song that sounded like a lullaby and a countdown at the same time. The clips were cut clean. Milk is on the wrong shelf. The pillbox opened at the wrong hour. My gaze drifted in a way they chose to call lost. Captions rose over the images like closed captions for a life they did not live. Caring is a full-time job. Be gentle when Dad forgets. The view count blinked upward as we watched. The title said, "Day with my declining father." The name on the post was not mine. I did not ask Mrs. Wheeler why she brought this to me. I could see it in the way her mouth tried to hold 2 shapes at once. Worry and apology. Her granddaughter said, "I can show you how to save it to your phone." She did not use the word evidence. She did not need to. She stood close enough for her shampoo to smell like apples and tapped a sequence without looking at her fingers. She said, "Now you have a copy." She said, "Tap here to see the timestamp and tap here to see the account that posted it, and tap here to see the comments with the ones they deleted marked if you dig." She stopped and looked at me the way daughters look at grandfathers when they realize the world is not as safe as the porch suggests. I thanked her and thanked her grandmother and watched them walk back down the steps in step. When the door closed, the house swallowed the sound and kept it safe. I sat at the table and let my eyes trace the path of the light across the wall. I opened the video with the sound off. Without music, the edits clicked harder. I slowed the clip to half speed. I paused at a frame where a hand set the milk on the shelf low enough for the camera to see it later. The hand had a half-moon scar by the thumb. The grinder. My bench. Years ago. I felt no victory in spotting it. I felt an old lesson sit down across from me. Stories can be carved, as clean as wood if the blade is sharp and the carver is patient. I set the phone flat on the table and watched the ceiling instead. It held. It always had. Jason called at 2 like a man who trusts an appointment to do his heavy lifting. He asked if I had eaten. He asked if I had seen the email about the consult. He asked if I would like him to drive. I told him I had eaten. I told him I had seen it. I told him I would meet him there. He said, "Dad, you get turned around when you leave the neighborhood lately." I told him the streets are the same. I told him I know the way to the rooms where people write things down. He said, "Let me help." I said, "Help is not the word for this." Vanessa texted a heart and the phrase, "Proud of you for trying." Pride wears differently when it is issued like a ticket. I typed back one sentence. "Save your battery." She sent a thumbs up and then a link to a blog about caregiver burnout with a note that said, "This is our life now." I looked at the pronoun and wrote it in my notebook beside the time. Hour. Then I added a line for the bank call and a line for the speakerphone summary and a line for the video posted under a stranger's name. The notebook's weight in my palm felt like a tool that remembers its job. I walked through the kitchen once to reset the towel on the oven handle. Then I stepped onto the porch to let the wind sort me. The phone in my pocket buzzed twice with new comments I did not open. Somewhere in this city, a young editor in a small room added another clip to a queue that would tilt a story towards sympathy for anybody but the subject. The magnolia leaves rasped a short sentence I understood. "Do not touch what is already showing you its shape." I lifted my cap and checked the tiny switch by feel. The diode warmed the fabric above my eyebrow. The recorder did not care about filters. It did not ask anyone to clap. It caught breath and tone, and the moment a lie strolls past the line where it thinks no one can see its feet. I heard footsteps on the sidewalk and let them pass before I went back inside. In the hallway, I paused by the framed photograph of Helen laughing at something I was saying that was not funny. I have learned there are laughs you earn and laughs you borrow and laughs that get used as currency by people who want to buy a public life with your private one. I touched the frame with one finger and then left it alone. Enough touching. The phone on the table lit itself and rang in that new soft way. I did not hurry to answer. When I picked it up, the ringtone faded into the small click that tells you the call is already being recorded by someone else. "Hello, Dad," Jason said. I said yes. He asked, "Do you know what day it is?" I told him. He asked where you keep the milk. I said in the fridge where you put it. The silence that followed was a clean line in fresh snow. He said, "See you at 3. I said I know the way. When I ended the call, I let the phone sit face down until the light went out. I took one breath for the man who taught me torque, and one breath for the woman who taught me how to place a towel back on its rail, and one breath for myself. Then I put the phone in the notebook's shadow and wrote one more line I had not written before. The phone is not a witness. It is a lens. I am the witness. And when a lens bends light long enough, it forgets the angle that will expose it. They recorded me out of cruelty. I recorded them for clarity. I started with the cap because the cap never asked for applause. Threaded needle. 2 careful passes through the lining where the crown seam holds. The recorder sat light as a coin above my eyebrow. I ran the wire along the seam with my thumb until it learned the path and stayed. The switch found its home where a finger could reach it without thinking. When I clicked it, the sound was a small certainty, not loud, not showy, just the first brick in a wall. The house made a quiet that was good for work. I pulled the lamp close until the cone of yellow turned the table into a clean stage. Notebook on the left, phone on the right, the little stack of printed screenshots in the middle. My handwriting kept time along the margins, dates, places, the words people use when they want a story to move without friction. I did not hunt for anger in the pages. I hunted for edges. An edge tells you where to press. I opened the county website and moved slowly enough for the screen to keep up. Property search, owner name, street. The house answered the page with my name spelled the way my mother taught me. Recorded deed on file. Date old enough to carry weight. No new filings. I breathed once and let the breath carry a small piece of worry out the window. They were building a case in the room of opinion. They had not reached the room where paper sleeps. The lamp hummed the way lamps do when they are about to work long. I laid Vanessa's clips beside my notes and looked without sound. A camera tells on itself if you let it talk too long. Filters change skin. They do not change shadows. The shadows in her kitchen were wrong for the timestamp under the video. The shadow of a plant on the wall leaned left when morning here leans right. I wrote that down and drew a small arrow because arrows remind you to look again later. Near dusk, a new post appeared on a larger account that collects other people's lives and sells them as empathy. It was a clean photograph of a glass coffee table with a spread of documents arranged for the eye. The caption said, "Care planning is love." The paper at the center wore a border like the ones offices use when they want to look official. On the right edge of the frame, a round stamp mark sat near a signature that looked like mine if my hand had learned to write by watching itself in a mirror. I pinched the image wider with 2 fingers until the pixels argued and then settled. The notary seal claimed a name I did not know. Commission number blurred, expiration date printed in a style I had not seen on real stamps. The glass table caught the room and gave it back in a soft reflection. In that reflection, I could see the microwave clock behind the sofa, 8:17 at night. The stamp said 10:05 in the morning 2 days earlier. Reflection does not keep secrets from people who love staging. I kept looking. On the lower corner of the glass, the reflection held a small square sticker on the stamp device itself. A barcode and a retail name you do not see in county offices. The price tag still clung to the tool that was supposed to make this sacred. I took 3 screenshots, then used the phone's built-in tool to mark the sticker and the clock, and the alignment of the lamp shadow. I did not add words. Pictures would do the heavy lifting when the time came. The cap clicked under my finger. The red diode warmed the fabric. The phone rang twice on the table and I let it. Then I called Dean. His voice arrived the way solid things arrive. No hurry, no performance. He asked how the porch was holding me. I said the porch is a witness. He said witnesses do not lie if you let them rest. I told him what I had and what the reflection gave me. He did not ask me to send it yet. He told me to make a second copy on a separate card. He told me the chain of custody is not just a phrase. It is a map you follow later when somebody wants to know where the truth lies between 2 rooms. I asked him about stamps. He said every state lets a notary be known in daylight. He said he could check the registry for a name. He asked me to spell the letters I could see. I did, and heard his keyboard answer in short bursts. He said there was no one by that name with an active commission in our county. He said the font on the expiration looked like a house made of cheap lumber. He said nothing about guilt or shame. He spoke like a man reading torque values. Either the bolt holds or it does not. If it does not, you do not take it personally. You take it out. I told him about the signature. The loop in the Q leaned the wrong way. The habit I have of placing a small pressure point halfway through the H because my hand learned on cold mornings to pause there. He said signatures are not photographs. They are living things. But a living thing does not reverse itself for fun. He asked if I had a specimen that belonged to me beyond doubt. I said the bank still prints the old signature on my monthly statements because I asked them to keep me a little stubborn. He laughed a small laugh that belonged to a friend and then reminded me to date every note. He told me on Thursday that we would let them set the stage and then turn on brighter lights. After the call, I placed the phone face down and listened to the cap give back its faint mechanical breath. I moved to the front room where the window is large enough to make a mirror at night. I set the papers on the table before that dark glass and took a photograph that caught my own reflection holding the camera, a record of me making the record. I learned that trick from a sergeant decades ago who never lost a tool and never lost a case when he wrote that it was his. He said if someone can see you in the picture, you were there. The lamp warmed my fingers as I turned pages in the notebook and added small anchors. Water notice redirected. Bank contact added and then reversed. Video timestamp versus plant shadow. Notary name not found. Sticker on the stamp device. Microwave clock reflection. Signature lean wrong. The commission date is inconsistent with the light in the room. I did not draw lines between the points. The lines will draw themselves once you place enough points in the right weather. Jason texted an hour later with a sentence that tried to be neutral. Do you need anything for tomorrow? I typed and erased 3 different answers. Then I sent the one that would age well. Bring yourself. Vanessa followed with a heart and a calendar reminder with the address of a downtown office that uses frosted glass to make regular rooms perform well. I saved the address to a note and wrote out the floor number by hand. Phones lose their way when they want to be clever. Paper does not. I clicked the recorder and watched the diode dim even though I could not see it through the cap. I set the cap on the chair beside me as if it needed a rest. The house inhaled in the small ways houses do. Air through the vent, a little pop from a board that remembered the sun. I let the quiet teach me patience until my shoulders moved down without permission. Later, when I could not sleep the way people like to write about, I walked back to the table and opened the photograph on the phone again. I traced the reflection near the stamp with my finger. The sticker's barcode was soft, but it was there. The brand name read as clearly as truth under a good bulb. I typed it into a search bar and found rows of novelty stamps that look official from a distance you choose for your story. One product description said perfect for crafts and cosplay. I closed the search and put the phone down because my heart did not need to rehearse outrage. Outrage is a mask that slips. Proof is a door that locks. The morning brought a pale square of light on the table. I sat in it until the warmth moved into my hands. Then I called the county clerk's office and asked a question without dressing it up. If a deed is signed, what does the county need to see for it to matter? The clerk had the voice of someone who has answered the same question enough times to know tone does not change truth. She said a signature. A notary with a commission that breathes. A witness who lives outside the paper. She said the stamp must tell us who and when, and how long that who can serve. She did not ask who I was. I thanked her and wrote each piece without commentary. Commentary helps no one in rooms where boxes get checked. I turned the recorder on and off and let its click be the metronome for the rest of the morning. Click. Sort the screenshots into a folder with a name that does not announce victory. Click. Place a copy in a second drive and label it with a date, like a man who expects to be asked later what he did when. Click. Fold the county printout and slide it under the first folder. Click. Test the cap by speaking 3 sentences in different rooms until the playback proves the house itself will be a witness if I ever need it. When noon found me, the lamp looked tired. I turned it off and let the window take over. Sunlight opens a different kind of file. You see what does not belong. The glass coffee table in the photograph did not belong in a story about law. The stamp with a barcode did not belong on a deed. The clock reflected in the glass did not belong to the time the page claimed. I closed the notebook and placed my hand flat on its cover. Patience made a sound in that room. It sounded like a small click tucked inside cloth and a lamp cooling after work. It sounded like a man who had been watching, deciding what to watch back. They served me cold chicken and warmer lies. The Rowans strung white lights through their maple and set folding tables in the grass like an invitation for the neighborhood to believe whatever was easiest. Aluminum trays steamed. Plastic forks clicked. Someone put on a playlist that knew all the words before the mouths did. I stood near the hedges where the citronella tried to make mosquitoes polite. Jason steered me into the open with one hand on my shoulder, the way men steer shopping carts when they want to look like help. He thanked people with the smile he keeps for audiences. He said Dad has good days and not so good days. He said, we are taking steps. Vanessa hovered at the edge of each conversation with her phone close to her wrist and her tone set to soothing. She told Mrs. Rowan that community is everything when a decline visits a house. She let the word decline land softly and stay. I let the cap sit low and let the recorder work. The cap did what caps do best. It watched without asking permission. The yard smelled like cut grass and ranch dressing. I counted the voices that repeated the same script. If you need anything, if you need rides, if you need help. I said thank you as if I might need sugar next week and pretended I did not hear the quiet relief that I was not their problem yet. Jason fetched me a plate and told me to sit. He lowered his voice for the line he had been saving. Everyone thinks you are declining, Dad. I let the fork rest and looked at the paper plate where the coleslaw had given up. Declining. No. I am just descending to where truth hides. He laughed like he had not heard me and went to refill his own glass. People came in pairs to offer advice they had read between ads. A man from 2 streets over said his cousin used a consultant who helps with transitions. He used the word gentle 3 times. A woman I knew from church said there is a clinic that can certify capacity for families facing hard choices. Vanessa tilted her chin at that and said, we have one lined up already. ClearPath Cognitive Wellness has a doctor who writes the most thorough reports. She said it with pride, like a new appliance delivered on time. I asked the first question I knew I would ask. "Who is the doctor?" Vanessa smiled and said, "Dr. Casey Marlowe, a specialist in aging minds." She showed me the homepage on her phone. The logo glowed soft green. A head silhouette sprouted leaves. The subheading promised compassionate clarity in one visit. The address line ended with a .care and a hopeful tagline. I asked where the office is. She said online. Jason added that remote means efficient. He used it efficiently like a bandage. 2 houses down, a nurse named Linda Park came through the gate with a salad and a tired kindness. She saw the screen in Vanessa's hand and leaned closer the way nurses do when names sound like prescriptions. She asked if Dr. Marlowe is with Memorial or the private clinic on Whitaker. Vanessa said independent. Linda nodded once and said, "Independent is fine as long as the license is active." Vanessa turned the screen so Linda could admire the leaves around the head and said, "This one does virtual assessments and has great testimonials." Linda asked, "Do they use a neurologist for a final sign-off?" Vanessa blinked. She said the assessments are streamlined. Linda said streamlined can be lovely for laundry. For medical declarations, we check the state registry. She smiled to keep it soft, then moved away to hug a neighbor. Jason pulled me aside toward the buffet to talk loudly enough for nearby ears. He said, "Dad, we are following best practices." He said we cannot ignore patterns. He said people have seen it. He gestured toward the yard like the grass had taken notes. Vanessa joined us with a printed page that looked official from a distance. She had used good paper. The header read, "Cognitive Baseline Screen," and under it the name Dr. C. Marlowe, with a degree abbreviated in a way that looked important if you do not collect degrees for a living. At the bottom, a line of small print ran like ants. I asked to hold it. She let me. I stood under the maple where the light flickered through the leaves and read. The disclaimer said this screen does not constitute a medical diagnosis. The next line said not intended for court proceedings unless corroborated by a licensed physician. The next assessor is certified by the Institute of Integrative Cognition. I let my thumb cover the institute and let my mind go to the county registry Dean told me about. The page had a faint stamp for effect. The circle was too clean. Around the edge, the words blurred in spots where real stamps sink into paper. The ink looked printed. A barcode lurked near the margin like a retail truth that had not been fully erased. I asked when you met Dr. Marlowe. Jason said yesterday via video. He said she asked smart questions. He said she watched how I handled the pill organizer. He said she noticed confusion in my eyes. His eyes flickered toward Vanessa to confirm the story. Vanessa nodded and added that the doctor said safety words like guardianship and temporary. Nurse Park drifted back with a glass of water and set it on the table near us. She looked at the paper in my hand and tilted her head. She said I do not recognize that credential. She rubbed her finger along the stamp and showed me the ink that did not smudge. She said stamp smudge if a hand breathes. She said the state site lists physicians and psychologists with licenses that you can read. She said if you want, I can check later. She said this in the tone nurses use to keep people from walking into walls they cannot see yet. Across the yard, the HOA president raised his voice to thank the Rowans and to remind folks about the speed limit on our street and the new trash schedule. People laughed and clapped and returned to the work of avoiding each other's private storms. A child ran past with a paper cup and clipped my elbow. The cup flew. Wine caught the light and fell. The glass hit the stones and broke in a circle that sounded like a bell practicing sorrow. Vanessa gasped as if glass gave her a reason to film. Her phone came up quickly. Linda Park knelt and said, "No one move." She picked up shards with careful fingers and dropped them into the cup. She looked up at me, and then at Vanessa, and then at the paper on the table, and then away. She had seen enough. I let my breath slow and watched how quickly attention moves when it wants to. The party reknit itself. The playlist found the chorus. Jason told 2 different guests that I get overwhelmed in crowds and that we are working on solutions. He put his arm around my shoulders again and squeezed when he said the word solutions. I looked at the printed screen one more time. In the upper right corner, a pixelated seal borrowed authority it had not earned. In the lower left, a line asked for payment through a platform that is not a bank. I thought about tools disguised as toys. I thought about toys disguised as tools. Jason turned back to me with the confidence of a man who has convinced himself first. He said, "This will protect you." He said it will protect us. He said, "You can trust me." I looked at his hand as he held the paper. The half-moon scar near his thumb made a pale comma against the letters. The comma asked me to pause. I did. Vanessa stepped closer with the smile that brings applause online. She said, "We are telling this story to help other families not feel alone." She said, "If we can show the journey, people will be kinder when they see a man like you losing step." She said, "Imagine the hope." I pictured a line of strangers using my face to practice sympathy for themselves. I pictured a folder in Dean's office with this page and the barcode and the disclaimer and a note in his hand that said, "Not a doctor." I heard his voice in my head, reminding me that a court is allergic to performance when performance pretends to be proof. Linda returned and set her phone face down near the napkins. She said quietly that she searched the state registry. She said there is no Dr. Casey Marlowe with a medical license here. She said there is a wellness coach 2 counties over with a certificate in integrative cognition that does not grant authority to decide capacity. She said, "Get a real evaluation if anyone asks you to sign anything permanent." She lifted her glass and smiled at Vanessa and said, "Beautiful night." Then she walked away to talk about roses and mulch like the rest of the evening demanded. The Rowans came around with pie and plastic forks. People told stories about summers that did not hurt. Jason moved to the center to laugh with a neighbor, and Vanessa filmed the sunset as if she had painted it herself. I stood near the stone path and watched the tiny bulbs pulse along the fence. The yard light buzzed once and blinked the way old fixtures blink when the ballast remembers its age. The cap warmed my forehead with the quiet work of keeping a record. The wind pushed one napkin into the grass, and the grass kept it. When the tray came to me, I shook my head and set the printed page under the plate someone had left. The paper looked harmless there, a small square under a bigger circle. I pictured the secretary in a courthouse someday holding up this same paper and saying the small print cancels the big claim. I pictured Jason telling a friend that everyone saw it with their own eyes. I pictured the cap playing back laughter and phrases, and the way a nurse said stamp smudge if a hand breathes. The glass at my feet crackled as someone stepped wrong near the stones. The sound lifted the evening into a sharper color. I wrote names in my head as if my mind were a ledger. The HOA man, the couple from the corner, Linda, the Rowans, the little boy with the paper cup. Witnesses do not have to like you to be useful. They only have to stand where the air carries a clean sentence. By the time the party thinned, the lights along the fence were blinking in sets, 3 on and 3 off, the way old strings coordinate their goodbyes. Jason hugged me in a careful half circle and said, "Big day tomorrow." Vanessa kissed the air near my cheek and said, "We are so proud of how you are trying." I told them to drive safely. I told them the map knows the way. When the gate clicked behind them, the yard exhaled. The broken glass had been swept. A faint wine stain darkened the path like a shadow that chose to stay. I stepped around it and felt the cap's light warmth like a small sun I could carry into any room. Across the street, porch lamps winked and went out one by one. The night learned our names again, quietly. The garden had given me what I needed. An audience, a paper that performed too hard, a nurse who speaks truth in a voice that never needs a stage. The lights buzzed, they flickered, they settled. And in that small hush after a party forgets itself, the evidence did what evidence does best. It stayed. He thought I would sign away my sanity. I signed his downfall instead. Thursday wore a shine like a brand new appliance. The downtown building dressed itself in frosted glass and brushed steel as if surfaces could make anything inside honest. I rode the elevator with my cap in my lap and let the small red light warm the cloth. When the doors opened, the hallway smelled like lemon cleaner and staged confidence. Jason stood when he saw me and put on the smile he saves for rooms. Vanessa adjusted her phone so the camera could find the concern before it found my face. The receptionist handed me a clipboard and called everything routine. She offered a pen with a logo that had never been repaired. I set it aside. In my breast pocket, Helen's fountain pen waited like a tool that remembers its job. A woman in a charcoal jacket stepped out of a side office and introduced herself as a specialist in family transitions. Her name slid past me without leaving a mark. She waved us into a conference room with a table that reflected whoever leaned over it. Papers were arranged into stacks with little flags where a signature should go. Jason said, "We are here to make things easier." He pushed the first stack toward me with a careful hand. "You can trust me." I felt the cap's wire against my scalp and the sound of my breath come back to me through cloth. That is what the last thief said before the safe closed. The woman in the charcoal jacket tried to laugh and then did not. Vanessa sat at the corner and tilted her phone until my hands filled the screen, but not the person attached to them. I asked to read everything. The woman smiled the way people smile at a child doing a math problem. She said of course and tapped an acrylic tab that said guardianship packet. The packet used fonts that were designed to be law when they grew up. I took my time. The first page used a phrase I had memorized this week. Best interest in light of demonstrated decline. The next page listed the powers to be transferred. At the bottom of a notary block waited for a stamp that would try to play judge. I kept my face where they needed it. Inside, I laid my notes next to each sentence and watched how the holes lined up. On the credenza behind the woman's chair sat a tote bag with a small stamp device peeking out. A round seal weighted like a coin in a trick. A barcode sticker clung to its side. I did not reach for it. I did not need to. I had seen its cousin under a maple tree already. I took Helen's pen from my pocket and held it in my palm as if it could feel me thinking. A week ago, in Dean's office, I had flushed the nib and loaded a fresh cartridge. The cartridge looked ordinary enough to belong in any desk drawer. It did not act ordinarily. Vanishing ink is a childish name for something patient. It leaves a signature that behaves itself until it does not. The woman slid another page across the table and placed her finger on a yellow flag. Just initial here. To acknowledge understanding. Jason said, "This is how we keep you safe." I said, "Safety does not need so many flags." I signed the first line slowly. The pen made the right sound against the paper. The room relaxed. Vanessa leaned in. I kept my handwriting steady as a torque wrench and placed my initials in each small box as if boxes could hold me. Jason exhaled like a man finishing a race he did not train for. He told the woman, "This is such a relief." She said we help families breathe again. Her tote sat very still. The barcode watched me from the corner of my eye. Halfway through the packet, I paused at a paragraph that assigned access to bank accounts for convenience and security. I traced the sentence with my index finger and looked up at Jason until he blinked. Convenience is the loneliest word in a courthouse. He glanced at the phone in Vanessa's hand, then away. The woman asked if there were any parts I wanted her to explain. I told her explanation would not improve the ink. We reached the notary block. The woman produced the stamp from the tote as if she were about to bless the page. I read the name on the ring and the expiration date printed in a font that had never tasted real paper. She pressed the stamp too gently. The circle landed crisp instead of breathing into the fibers. She smiled at the perfect ring without noticing that perfection is a bad witness. She asked for my identification. I handed it over and watched her glance at the photograph without really seeing the man. She said, "We are complete once you sign there." She slid a second stack around the one I had been working on. She said, "And here, this one acknowledges that you understand the need for guardianship." She did not call it permanent. She called it compassionate. I signed and initialed and placed the pen down and heard the tiny click of the cap switch when I adjusted it on my head. The recorder took that sound and put it where I could use it later. When she gathered the pages, I could almost feel the ink beginning its slow exit. It would not be today. It would not be soon enough to spoil the performance they had planned for the drive back. It would be just in time for a clerk to lift a page and frown at a ghost. Jason clasped my shoulder as if he had just pulled me from a river. He said, "You will thank me for this." I said, "Gratitude is a strange language when you speak it to yourself." Vanessa reached for the stack with the appetite of someone who believes paper is a dessert. The woman offered to make me a copy. I told her copies remind me of engines with loose bolts. She said I can email a scan. I said email tends to be forgotten. She said many families prefer less clutter. I said I prefer history. I stood and steadied the leg of my chair with my foot so it would not scrape. The woman handed Jason a manila envelope with the packet inside. He tucked it under his arm with the ease of a man who had carried an idea this far and was not prepared for gravity. Vanessa asked if I wanted to say anything for our records. I looked at her phone lens and gave it air. It blinked and waited and got nothing, and will someday play back the shape of my silence for people who do not know what a real record sounds like. We stepped into the hall. The lemon cleaner tried again. The elevator arrived, and Jason rested his head against the cool metal like the day had been heavy for him. He said, "You did the right thing." I said the right thing tends to reveal itself a day later. He opened his mouth and closed it again. The doors slid shut without comment. On the sidewalk, the afternoon had rounded the corner toward something softer. I told them I was heading down the block for a coffee and would meet them out front. Vanessa said she wants us to wait with you. I said no. She said text if you need directions. I said the streets are in the same places they were yesterday. I walked to the law office where the wood smelled like old books and lemon oil, and nothing was staged. Dean was waiting under a lamp that made the table a safe harbor. He asked a question with his eyes, and I answered with the envelope I did not bring. He nodded once and slid a different set of papers toward me. A declaration of intent to manage my own affairs, a revocation of any signatures obtained under pressure, an instruction that all communication must go through counsel, and a sworn statement about the events of the afternoon. He turned the lamp so it lit the lines. "Use Helen's pen," he said in the voice that needs no volume. The ink in my pocket was the permanent kind again. I unscrewed the barrel at his desk and watched the old black draw into the nib. Then I wrote with the hand my mother taught me. The pen moved without effort. The sound of nib on paper was not loud, but it was the sound of a door shutting. When I finished, Dean took the pages and added his own signature. He attached a seal that bent into the fibers the way real authority does. He placed 2 copies in 2 different folders and handed me one with a calm ceremony. He said, "Say the sentence you need to hear." I said I did not sign my life away. I signed their story's ending. He led me down the hall to a room with a safe that had its own gravity. The steel door opened on slow hinges and paused like a man listening before he answers. We set the folder in a drawer and slid it home. Then I heard the sound I had carried as a promise since morning. The wheel turned. The bolts met their sockets. The lock settled with a heavy certainty that traveled through my ribs. The pen on the table behind us dried a shine into each stroke. Back outside, the sun had shifted to the angle where shadows decide who they belong to. Jason texted a question about dinner. I let it rest in the display without answering. People like him fear ink more than blood. Blood dries and disappears into stories you can edit. Ink survives in rooms where performances go to die. I put the pen back in my pocket and tipped the cap forward until the red diode warmed my forehead one more time. Somewhere between this office and a county clerk's desk, a signature would fade like a lie, remembering it was not welcome. I headed toward the corner coffee shop, not for coffee, but for the sound of cups and spoons and people who think their day is small. The doorbell rang, the air changed, the world went on, and beneath it, like a steady engine under a hood, the record kept running. Every metal I pinned on felt heavier with memory, lighter with purpose. The jacket lay open on the bed like a page I had not read in years. The blue was deeper than I remembered. Cloth remembers the last hands that cared for it. Helen's hands. She used to smooth the shoulders with her knuckles, checking seams the way a mechanic checks a rivet. I laid the ribbon rack where it belonged and breathed until my fingers stopped arguing with time. Metal touched fabric and settled. The clink sounded like a small decision becoming final. I set the cap beside the jacket and checked the tiny switch by feel. The recorder warmed the lining above my eyebrow with the same calm heat that had kept me company in rooms where performance wanted to be truth. I did not need the cap to speak today. I needed it to listen. I slid the jacket sleeve toward me, found the zipper tab, and drew it up 2 inches just to hear the sound. Teeth met teeth. That quiet rasp steadied me better than any speech could. The house was clean, the way Sunday mornings are clean if you give them the first word. Coffee sat in a mug I did not need to finish. The porch waited in its usual patience. For a moment I saw Helen at the mirror pinching my collar flat as if pride should have no wrinkle. She would say there is a difference between dressing up and dressing right. She would ask if the medals felt like a weight or wind. I would tell her the truth. Today, they felt like a tool. Dean called while the light was still soft. His voice arrived with the gravity of a man who has watched storms choose a direction. He asked if I wanted quiet justice or public one. I told him publicly. Sunlight disinfects faster. He let the words sit a beat and then said he had done a thing that would either irritate me or bless me. He said he had sent my name to the committee that chooses who rides at the front of the memorial parade. He said he did not argue. He just read my record and then folded his hands. He said sometimes silence does the work. They said, "Yes, Harold." He paused the way you pause when a door closes softly and you know the latch took. He told me the announcement would go out this week. He said my name would be in ink next to the time the town gathers to remember who stands between comfort and cost. I sat back on the edge of the bed and let the jacket hold my gaze. Grand Marshal was a phrase I had avoided for a lifetime because applause makes me itchy. Today, it sounded like a room with many windows. I asked Dean if this was a strategy or a ceremony. He said, both. He said a uniform is a summons. He said the town will be there and the phones will be there and the people who are concerned will be there. He said the stage already existed. We would only choose how to use it. He asked again if I was certain about the public. I told him that privacy had been the tool they used to cut me down to size. I told him I wanted witnesses who had not auditioned. We reviewed the simple plan until it was boring. Boring is good when the other side is addicted to theater. He would file the papers we had signed and deliver notices the morning of the event if needed. He would hold the restraining order until the moment it mattered and not a second longer. He would bring copies on different paper stock for eyes that trust texture over argument. He would keep the chain of custody double-stitched so no one could say the truth wandered between rooms. He would not coach my voice. He said he wanted me to sound like myself speaking in the kitchen. He wanted sentences that fit in a palm. The jacket waited. The house listened. I slid the zipper the rest of the way and felt the cloth close around me with a forgiveness it did not owe me. The metals settled right and bright. The mirror over the dresser reflected a man I recognized and a man I had not met yet. The set of my shoulders changed by a fraction. The air felt organized. There are days when a uniform is the only clothing. There are days when it is a corridor. I walked from the bedroom to the living room and the living room to the porch and paused where Helen used to kiss two fingers and press them to the doorframe as if blessing a threshold made the street easier to cross. The magnolia leaves moved but did not clap. I touched the brim of the cap and stepped into a day that kept its spine straight. At the VFW hall, the coffee was strong and the jokes were old, and the respect did not need applause to breathe. Dean met me at the door with a small nod that said, "Good. No more." A man from Korea shook my hand as if we had kept a promise for each other. A woman from Iraq folded me into a hug that smelled like motor oil and laundry soap. The bulletin board held flyers for pancake breakfasts and a notice about a flag retirement ceremony. On a side table, a stack of programs from last year sat under a paperweight shaped like an eagle that had lost a wing and kept flying anyway. Dean took me into his small office with a desk that had seen more truth than some courtrooms. He showed me the draft announcement from the local paper. The words were simple on purpose. They named my tours. They named the medals. They did not name the drama in my living room. He said the story that follows your name is the one you choose to tell after the band has tuned. He looked at the jacket, and I saw his face soften around the eyes. He asked if Helen would approve. I told him she would fix my collar and send me out the door with a grocery list I was not to forget. He laughed once, and then the laugh turned into a breath that understood more than it said. We talked logistics the way you talk landing patterns. He would be near the microphones if I needed a straight back behind me. He would carry an envelope with a document that could be opened under a sky that belongs to everyone. He would not hurry me. He would not perform. He would say my name and the years and then step aside. He warned me that eyes that had been trained to pity would be searching my face for signs of weakness they could consume later. He told me to give them steady instead. On the way out, an old drum sat on a stand in the corner like a memory that wanted to be touched. A kid from a high school band was practicing in the next room. The cadence reached us through a wall as nothing but a heartbeat. I let it move through my ribcage and keep time with something deep that had been patient too long. Dean rested his hand on the frame of the door. He told me that public justice has a cost. He said it can leave scars where you used to think skin was spare. He asked me if I wanted to adjust the plan. I said I understood the cost. I said we were not hunting spectacle. We were making sure the right light landed on the right faces. Back home, I set the jacket on the chair Helen loved. The fabric made a quiet sound like the end of a hymn. I sat opposite and looked at the two of us in the room. The man who had been gaslit into stillness. The man who would walk with 100 eyes on his shoulders and tell a short truth. I polished the metals with the corner of a cloth until they caught the window and threw 2 small moons onto the ceiling. I thought about the boys who will watch from curb level with sticky fingers and free time. I thought about the girls who will see a uniform and not a hashtag. I thought about the Rowan stringing lights and the nurse who says stamp smudge if a hand breathes, and the neighbor who handed me a misdelivered envelope that started me listening harder. The phone vibrated with a message I did not need. Jason asked if I wanted him to arrange a suit fitting. Vanessa sent a calendar invite with a smiling flag. I placed the phone face down and wrote a line in the black notebook. Stage chosen. Witnesses will arrive by habit. Truth will not need a script. I placed the pen beside the notebook and let the room cool. Evening came on with the soft edges of a city that knows how to be quiet when it wants to. I took the jacket in both hands again and eased my arms through the sleeves. The zipper met the tab. The teeth are aligned. The sound filled the space between my sternum and my spine. I adjusted the cap and felt the tiny warmth where the diode lives. I did not press the switch. I did not need to hear that click to understand what was already in motion. Outside, somewhere beyond the block, a drum line rehearsed for a day that was approaching. The rhythm drifted over rooftops and slid under the porch rail and settled in the wood like a second heartbeat. I stood in the doorway and let it meet me. Justice is not a punch, it is a light. It falls where it is aimed. I took one more breath and let it go slowly so the jacket could remember me. Then I stepped back into the house and laid the cap and medals down with the care you reserve for things that will have to speak for you soon. The drum kept time. The zipper's echo lingered. The room knew. And for the first time since the milk and the pillbox and the camera that chose the wrong angle, I felt the day tilt toward my side. They said I forgot who I was, so I reminded them in front of everyone. The sun had the bright honesty of a day that does not owe you shade. The band lined up along Hay Street and tuned itself into a heartbeat. Children held flags that were too big for their hands and made them look braver than they felt. I stood on the running board of the lead car until the marshal waved me forward. The medals on my chest caught the light and threw it back into 100 small faces. I felt their weight and felt how purpose lifts what memory makes heavy. Dean stood near the reviewing stand with a folder held like an instrument he knew how to play. Jason and Vanessa had the front row as if they had arrived early to claim it for the story they preferred. Jason wore his good shirt and the smile that expected applause. Vanessa held her phone, already awake. She checked the frame and made sure my hands were in it. Phones, like hands. The announcer said my name in a plain way that gave it more dignity than I deserved. He named the places I had served and the years I had put behind me, and the band fell quiet. I stepped to the microphone and took one breath, the way Helen used to take a breath before she told a hard truth kindly. The metals burned for a moment when the wind shifted and then cooled again. I kept it short. My voice did not need to carry much. A sentence can change more than a speech if it is the right one. I told the town that they had been told I was confused. I told them that confusion had been staged and filmed and sold. I told them I had recorded what was done to me and what I had been asked to sign and who had pretended to certify my mind. I held up a single sheet so the sunlight could pass through it. It was the county record that said my deed had never moved. I held up a second sheet from a licensed physician with a date and a seal that breathed into the paper. Fully competent. I said the words and let them sit there without decoration. Jason stood. He threw his voice at the stand the way boys throw rocks at water. He said, "Dad, stop this. You are tired and mixed up." I looked past the phones and into his face and let my answer find the microphone and the street and the sky. I said, "I am not confused, Jason. I am finally clear." You could feel the sound change. A crowd has its own lungs. It held its breath. The metals flashed again and then settled as if to say, "This is enough." I nodded to Dean. He stepped up as if we had rehearsed and did not need to. He read a line that belonged to the law and not to anyone's mood. Effective immediately, they are barred from your property. He handed a copy to a deputy who had been waiting at the foot of the stairs because of parade order. The deputy moved through the front row with a respectful stride and placed the papers in Jason's hand and then in Vanessa's. The page looked light in the air and heavy once it touched skin. Vanessa raised her phone and then let it dip. It is hard to film a door closing on a story you wrote yourself. Jason tried another sentence and found none that could stand in that light. You could hear the smallest sounds again. A flag flicked. A child coughed. Somewhere, a shoe scuffed wood. I set the manila envelope on the stand and opened it so anyone could see what was inside without me saying more. Screenshots that showed a barcode on a stamp that does not exist in the county. A registry printout that said no doctor by the name they used was licensed to declare a mind unsound. A statement from Nurse Linda Park that explained how real stamps smudge when a hand breathes. Dates. Times. The neat black handwriting I use when I do not want a page to slouch. I did not raise my voice. I did not accuse anyone by name. The evidence did not need my anger to stand. It only needed the sun. I thanked the town for raising its flags on mornings like this. I thanked the bands for practicing through sore lips. I said that a truth told where everyone can hear it is stronger than 1,000 apologies sent by text. Then I stepped back and let the microphone find nothing but wind. For a moment, the whole street forgot how to clap. Then the sound came and came again. It rolled down the bricks and under the reviewing stand and across the open space where the cars were waiting. I did not smile. I did not bow. I saluted the flag and then let my arm fall. In the front row, Jason stared at the copy of the order with a face that looked like math he had not studied for. Vanessa touched his elbow and said something I could not hear because the band had found the downbeat again. Dean moved beside me and did not speak. The folder closed with a soft sound. He slid a duplicate set of the documents into my hand even though we both knew where the originals were sleeping. He looked toward the sky as if to check the weather and then returned his eyes to the crowd. He never looks at the opponent when the light is doing the work. He looks at the light. We climbed down from the stand while the parade reassembled its rhythm. A boy tugged his mother's sleeve and pointed at my medals, and she whispered what they were without knowing each one. The deputy returned and gave Dean a small nod that said the papers had reached the right hands. Across the street, the Rowans stood with the HOA president and the couple from the corner. Nurse Park rested her palm on the back of a folding chair and watched without moving her mouth. A town is a jury of people who do not know they are on a jury until the verdict is already warm in their hands. I walked with Dean to the curb. He asked me with his eyebrows if I had anything left to say. I said no. He said, "Good." The car door opened, and I sat inside and let the velvet air of the seat remind me that there are soft things left in the world. The driver eased us into the line again. We rolled past faces that looked different now only because they knew a new thing. The medals carried the sun, and the sun carried the medals. The light belonged to both, and to neither. At the end of the route, the band released the last note and let it drift up between buildings. I stepped out and shook the driver's hand, and thanked him for going slow. The square began to empty the way water slips out of a tub. Phones went back to pockets, flags folded. The stage crew stacked chairs with the quiet competence that earns no headlines. Dean touched my sleeve once, and then left me to walk. By the time I reached the block where my house had kept watch longer than most of us have been alive, the day had tilted into that hour where shadows stretch and look for their names. I opened my gate and heard the hinge remind me. The porch boards gave the smallest complaint and then forgave me. I took off the cap and set it on the table where the recorder could cool. I loosened the jacket so the metals could rest. The house exhaled with me. In the kitchen, the air held the clean smell of morning. The towel on the oven rail hung straight. The clock kept its promise. No phone filmed any of it. No voice announced a thing. I poured water from the tap and drank half a glass without thinking. A bird outside tried a call and abandoned it halfway and tried again, louder. The silence after a public thing has its own taste. It is not a victory. It is not relief. It is a simple absence of someone else's story. I walked to the living room and stood in front of the frame that holds Helen's picture. The metals sent one last flash across the glass and then went dull. I remembered the line I had spoken without announcing it to myself first. I am not confused. I am finally clear. It sounded different now that the street did not echo it back. It sounded like it belonged in this room. I sat on the edge of the chair and listened to the house talk to itself. The refrigerator hummed, the air vent sighed, a car went by far away and then was gone. Somewhere downtown, people would be telling each other what they had seen and what they thought it meant. My name would be in those sentences for a while, and then it would not. Truth does not need to be repeated to hold. I set the folder on the table and placed my hand on it for a count of 5. Paper is lighter than regret. Ink frightens thieves more than anything read. A town heard a short truth. 2 people read a long order. The light did the rest. The applause became a memory. The silence started its work. And inside that silence, my house felt like my house again. When thieves fall, they never look down. They look for someone to blame. The morning after felt like a room that had been rearranged in the dark. Same walls, different gravity. Word moved faster than the weather. A neighbor I barely knew lifted a hand as I stepped onto the porch and then let it hover there, unsure whether a wave was an apology enough. The magnolia let go of 2 leaves at once, and they spun down like a quiet verdict. The first call came from the bank. A woman with a careful voice thanked me for providing documentation. She said the review was complete. Unauthorized transfers would be reversed. Convenience access removed. Paper statements restored. She asked if I wanted alerts sent to the mailbox, and I told her yes. Then she took a breath, you could hear even through the glass, and said one more thing. She said a fraud report had been forwarded to the proper office. She did not use the word justice. She did not need to. By noon, the county clerk had left a message. The voice had the patience of someone who files storms for a living. She said a packet had arrived with signatures that did not behave like signatures. She said an attempted deed action had been voided pending verification. She said the notary stamp presented did not match any commission in the registry. Then she said a sentence I will keep for the rest of my days. Ink tells the truth if you give it time. The licensing board wrote that afternoon. The subject line used 3 words that can lift or break a man. Immediate summary suspension. The body explained that complaints had reached the office. The parade video had been sent by a dozen people with the same note. Please review. The board had reviewed. Jason's license was placed on hold while an inquiry was opened. I read the words twice and felt nothing loud, just the soft weight of something that finally chose its own side. Brands that used to love Vanessa's glow wrote in a different tone. One withdrew from a campaign. Another paused a contract while they evaluated community feedback. A platform flagged a set of videos for misrepresentation of a medical condition. She posted a clip with a brave face and comments closed. I did not open it. I do not need to watch a person practice regret for cameras. The HOA president knocked with a lemon pie from his wife and a sentence that took him 3 tries to form. He said the board is sorry for any part we played in doing nothing. He said if I needed lawn help, there were volunteers. I shook his hand and told him I could push my own mower. He nodded as if the mower were a flag. After he left, I stood on the porch and listened. The street sounded the way it did before the story learned how to monetize itself. Dean called near dusk. His voice had the sound of work done right. Justice served, old friend. I sat in Helen's chair and watched the shadow line climb the porch rail. No, Dean, Justice remembered. He was quiet for a moment, which felt like respect, and then told me the deputy had confirmed delivery of all notices. He said the file now had more copies than anyone could misplace. He asked how the house was. Breathing, I said. News traveled in small local ways. The church bulletin thanked veterans by name, and mine landed there without the footnote that had been attached to me for months. Mrs. Wheeler brought tomatoes and did not mention the internet. Nurse Park left a note with a list of real clinics where real evaluations happen, and a line at the bottom that read in careful hand, "You are not alone in this street." I slid the note into the black notebook between the pages for Thursday and Friday. Paper can hold a kind of friendship that does not need an audience. A letter arrived from Jason's broker with a polite distance that sounded like a closing door. It said the firm had accepted his resignation during review. It wished him well in future endeavors. It did not name any. Another letter from a car company asked for a payment that had been missed and included a phrase about repossession if the account remained in arrears. I placed both letters on the table and did not move them for an hour. There is a temptation to feel victorious when gravity finds the men who threw stones. I let the temptation pass like a truck that does not stop on your street. Late that evening, 2 police cars idled at the curb while Jason and Vanessa carried 3 boxes out of my house under the eyes of a deputy who had memorized the order. They did not look up at the window. The boxes were light enough to be lifted by one hand. That is what happens when you try to own a life with paperwork. You end up with nothing that weighs as much as it should. The deputy tipped his hat toward the house when they were done, and then they were gone. The porch boards eased the way an old back eases after a long day. The next morning, I took the keys to the law office and visited the safe. Dean opened the drawer where my folder slept and laid a fresh copy of the revocation beside it. He placed another copy under a separate index card with a date in pencil. He said, "Redundancy is mercy for the future you." He asked if I had eaten. I told him the coffee was enough. He gave me a look that said he knew it was not, and then let me go without a speech. Neighbors started nodding in the direction of my fence the way people nod toward a grave when they pass it. The difference was that this fence enclosed a house that had stood for me. I oiled the gate, and it stopped complaining. I wiped down the porch rail the way Helen taught me, and the wood held a clean shine that felt earned. A boy from 2 doors down liked to ride his bike in circles in front of my walk. He lifted a hand now when he passed, and his mouth made a shape that looked like thanks, but he did not say the word because some words are too big for a street like ours. The financial quiet settled in stages. Charges reversed themselves one by one, and the ledger began to look like a story with a spine, again. A retirement account that had been untouched while I listened to lies began to feel like a tool rather than a secret. I met with a planner Dean trusted and told him the only plan I needed: keep the house awake, keep the porch honest, keep the lights on without debt. He said that the plan fits any age. Vanessa tried once to call and let it ring through. Then she sent a text that said, "Let us explain." I placed the phone face down until the screen gave up. I do not hate them. Hate steals more sleep than any thief. I do not forgive them either. Forgiveness is a word you don't hand out like napkins. I will let the quiet do the work that loud feelings try to claim. The quiet is better at it. Midweek, 2 reporters left business cards in my mailbox. I placed them under the lamp and did not call. The parade had been enough performance for a year. If anyone needed a quote, they could borrow the sentence already on the tape. I am not confused. I am finally clear. On Saturday, the doorbell rang, and the Rowans stood there side by side without a plate this time. Mr. Rowan said we saw and we are sorry, and if you ever need a chair moved or a branch cut, I own a ladder. Mrs. Rowan said we should have asked better questions sooner. She looked past me toward the hallway where Helen's photograph glows the way photographs do when the window catches them right. I thanked them, and we stood for a minute, saying nothing good and nothing bad, and then they walked back across the street with their hands linked like they remembered how. Sunday brought the sound of a mower from the yard next door. The engine rose and fell and found its even tone. The smell of cut grass slid across the porch like a familiar hymn. I pulled my own mower from the shed and checked the oil the way a man checks a heart he still trusts. The pull cord started the engine on the first try. I walked lines I have walked for 30 years, and the yard lay down into a pattern that made sense. As I turned at the flower bed, I realized I was smiling in a way that had nothing to do with winning. It had to do with air going in and out at the right rate. Dean called that evening just to see if my voice sounded like my voice. We traded a silence that meant more than any clever line. Then he said he would stop by on Tuesday with paperwork I did not have to read, but might want to hold. I said, "Bring coffee." He said he would. I slept with the window cracked. The house exhaled and inhaled and found a tempo that matched mine. Somewhere far off, a train pushed its horn through a space that used to make me lock my jaw. It sounded like a fact instead of a threat. Near dawn, the birds rehearsed 3 notes until they liked them. The sky went from slate to pearl in a way the porch understands. When the sun lifted enough to find the kitchen, I poured water and watched the light climb the cabinets. The towel hung straight. The clock kept faith. The quiet felt earned. There will be courts and files and the slow grind of offices that take their time, but the worst part is over. The rope they pulled on had been tied to their own feet. They tugged and called it love. They fell and called it unfair. I looked at the doorway and felt the house breathe again. The mower from next door started and faded as someone finished their rouse. That sound thinned into morning. The light found the table. And the day began like a page you do not need to defend. At sunrise, my coffee did not taste like revenge. It tasted like peace. Steam rose in a thin line and then disappeared into the quiet above the sink. The window found its pale color and gave it to the cupboards and the old clock and the small notch in the counter where a pot once fell. I stood there and waited until the mug warmed both hands. The house breathed with me. Inhale. Exhale. Nothing to defend. The porch asked for me the way it always has when morning is gentle. I carried the cup outside and sat where Helen used to sit when summer had not yet made any promises. The air felt clean in my throat. Down the block, a sprinkler ticked like a patient metronome. A bird tried a note and then tried it again with confidence. The magnolia woke leaf by leaf without any need for applause. I did not think about what had been taken. I thought about what had stayed. I brought a cloth from the kitchen and wiped the rail the way Helen taught me. Long strokes, corners matter. The wood drank the light and gave it back a little richer than it found it. A neighbor waved with the bravery of someone who has said nothing when it mattered and wants to start over anyway. I lifted my cup in a small salute. We do not have to narrate every mercy. Inside, the hallway kept its cool. On the wall, the frame that holds Helen's photograph glowed in a way that made the glass look kind. I took it down and set it on the table and cleaned it with the shirt I wear for chores. Her smile was the same measured joy that told me 30 years of mornings can be honest if you hold them with both hands. I propped the frame back where it belongs. It caught a square of sun and threw it across the floor like a quiet blessing. A letter lay on the table where I had set it last night without thinking. White envelope. My name is in a hand that used to write Christmas cards with certainty. No return address on the front, only a faint imprint where a pen pressed too hard above the stamp. The slot had given it up with a soft slap right after supper, and the sound had felt like a bird landing on the porch rail. I did not open it then. I do not open it now. I picked it up and let the weight sit on my palm. Apology has a heft that is more about timing than paper. Forgiveness is a word we use when we are tired of carrying something. I placed the envelope under the frame and slid it until the edge disappeared behind the wood. I said a sentence aloud to a room that knows how to keep its counsel. Forgiveness is not freedom for them, it is freedom for me. The words did not echo. They settled. The kettle clicked in the kitchen as the last heat gave itself up. I rinsed the mug and set it upside down on the rack. Water beaded and ran. I checked the towel on the oven rail and made it straight without thinking. The clock above the stove kept its promise in small, steady jumps. Time is kinder when you are not arguing with it. I took the black notebook from the drawer where it lives and set it on the table. The cover carried the faint shine of work. I flipped through pages that hold the weeks when silence was heavy and cameras were loud. Dates and times, and the short sentences that do not beg. I reached the last entry and let my finger rest there. The book did not ask for more. I closed it. I did not lock anything. Some doors are honest without a key. The phone hummed once on the counter and showed me a message from Dean. All filings accepted. Rest today. No exclamation, no parade of words. I smiled without showing teeth and typed 2 words back. Understood, Dean. Then I put the phone face down and let it stay that way until the screen gave up its light. Helen kept African violets in the window by the sink, leaves like open hands. I watered them the way she did. Tilt the pot. Count softly to 3. Stop before the soil becomes mud. I pinched one brown leaf loose with forefinger and thumb and set it in the trash. New growth hid just under the old. Plants forgive without telling anyone. I walked the rooms with no goal other than to listen. The rug in the hallway did not snag. The hinge on the bedroom door remembered the drop of oil I gave it last week and behaved itself. The dresser drawer I keep for receipts slid in and out with a small content sigh. In the closet, the jacket hung without asking to be part of today. I touched the sleeve with 2 fingers, the way some people touch a book they loved once and will love again. Cloth holds its own peace when you let it. On the porch, a breeze pulled a line of cool across my wrists and left. The street carried a small parade of its own kind. A dog walker who knows every crack in the sidewalk by heart. A boy who practiced riding with no hands and succeeded for 3 yards before he thought about it and put his palms back where they belonged. The mail truck stopped and started like a careful drumbeat. The world continued unbothered by our chapters. I made eggs and toast and ate at the table without rushing. The knife tapped the plate with a sound that could pass for music if you were in a forgiving mood. I washed the plate. I dried it. I put it away. I do not rush through ordinary work anymore. Ordinary work is the shape of a life no one can edit for you. By mid-morning, the light found the far wall and stretched there like a cat. I took a book from the shelf and read the same paragraph 3 times because the sentences felt newly built. Words about rivers cutting stone by being patient. Words about mountains, remembering the sea. I placed a scrap of paper between the pages and set the book down. A small truck rumbled by, and the house nodded and then went still again. I thought about calling Jason and did not. There is a mercy in leaving some sentences unwritten. The envelope under the frame will keep. If he needs something other than a stage, Dean knows how to reach me. If he wants to practice sorrow for a camera, he will have to do it somewhere that does not own my air. I swept the porch with the short, clean strokes Helen preferred. Dust rose and settled like the last hush in a sanctuary. The steps looked new when I finished, even though they are older than some of the trees on this street. I sat and watched the breeze lift a single leaf and set it down one board over. Not progress, not loss, just movement. In the afternoon, a neighbor kid knocked and asked if my mower still starts on the first pull. I said it does and told him to prove me right. He dragged it to the patch of grass by the curb and pulled once and grinned when the engine caught. He rode the handle back and forth like a boat on smooth water, and the sound was the sound of a life remembering itself. I gave him a glass of water when he finished, and he drank half in one long swallow and handed the rest back for the porch fern. He ran off without waiting for a story, and that felt correct. Evening came on with the kind of light that teaches windows how to be patient. I walked room to room, turning lamps on with the care you use when you know electricity is a miracle that has become casual. The house glowed, not bright, just sure of itself. I sat in the chair by the picture again and let my eyes half close until the shape softened and the edges took their own time. I thought about the years when I believed strength meant answering every challenge before the sentence was finished. I thought about the day I learned that a turned cheek is not surrender when it is facing the sun. I thought about the long, simple truth of a man living in his own rooms without tipping his voice for anyone. The sky outside shifted from pearl to a color you cannot name until you stop trying. Somewhere, a child laughed at a joke a parent will never understand. Somewhere, a screen lit a face and told it what to feel. Somewhere, a train found its note and carried it over places that are not my business. The envelope under the frame did not move. I will open it when it helps. I will not open it to feed a feeling I have already decided not to keep. Peace is not the lack of noise. Peace is the right kind of noise in the right room at the right hour. The clock agreed. The porch agreed. The house agreed. I carried the empty cup to the sink and set it down where the sun could kiss the rim before it left. I said goodnight without speaking. I let the window go dark. I let the floor hold me as I walked. I let the door click closed behind me with the soft sound houses make when they trust you. Then I stood at the foot of the bed with my hands at my sides and my eyes open to the last, thin line of light. What needed saying had been said. What needed keeping had been kept. And in the quiet that followed, nothing inside me reached for proof. Thank you for joining me on this journey. If you enjoyed this story, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your thoughts in the comments. To listen to the next story, click on the playlist now showing on screen.